Hi, everybody. Welcome. Do tune in. I'm Ben John from Christian Concern. I work on our Wilberforce Academy, which is our training and equipping program for young people, which is great. It's good to be with you today. Would love for you to join. We've been starting this since the lockdown, weekly chats on Fridays about some of the key issues that we at Christian Concern have been engaged in. And so I'm looking forward to chatting through some of those with my colleagues today. Please type in your comments if you're joining us from Facebook or YouTube. We do want to make sure everyone gets a hearing in what they're saying. We're really going to look to address some of the questions and comments that you have about some of the issues that we're going to be talking about. In fact, I'd love to hear about where you guys are all joining from. Do put in the comments whereabouts you're tuning in from. I'm here in closer in London at the moment, but not in the office. But it's good. Glad to see you guys are joining in, and even from France. Hello, Benjamin from France. Glad to have you with us today. Today, I'm going to be joined by Tim Dieppe, our head of public policy, and with Roger Kiska of the Christian Legal Centre. Hi, Tim. Hi, Roger. How are you doing?
Afternoon, Ben. Nice to see you. You're looking like you almost are in the office there. Very smart room you got there. And it's great to see Felix Ngole is actually joining us on Facebook by those things there. Hi, Felix. Great you're joining us. Love what you're doing. Love your case as well. A really powerful case. I hope you're enjoying life back at Sheffield, I think, or maybe not due to lockdown.
If you don't know Felix Ngole and you don't know his case, please do check it out on our Christian Concern. There's amazing interviews with him. Thank you, Felix, for your faithful stand for truth during this time. Hi, Roger. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's a pleasure to be on with you today. Excited to talk about some interesting stuff.
Yes, exactly. Well, the weather is very beautiful today. So thankfully the sun is out. Is it nice where you are, Roger?
Here in Central Europe, it's a bit rainy, but perfect time to be on Facebook Live.
Yes, I hope you aren't too jealous. Although we're indoors, perhaps not enjoying the sun, but it's great to be with you both. So we're going to be talking about a few things. As mentioned earlier, please do be putting your comments and questions into the chat on Facebook or YouTube. And please do give this a like on Facebook if you're watching. Then more people can be seeing what we're doing, and others can be joining in on the conversation about the issues that we will be discussing. So, Roger, we're going to be talking a bit about the hate crime proposals in Scotland. Could you share a little bit about those and why you think there might be an issue with them?
Well, sure. Scotland is proposing new hate speech legislation, which seems to piggyback on the Public Order Act that we have in England. And so they're criminalizing certain forms of speech. They're suggesting that incitement to hatred, possessing hateful material, stirring up hatred would be subject to criminal sanction. And currently, as of, I believe, April 23rd, a consultation was launched, which everyone watching I encourage to respond to. We can provide you the link to that later on. And, ultimately, it's even more troublesome than the law we have in England, in that while it does give some exemptions for criticizing sexual orientation and other religions, and that's particularly important, in apologetics or evangelism, it doesn't do so for gender identity. And this is a big point, that rather than using the traditional statutory words, the protected characteristics, in relation to gender identity, which is gender reassignment. That's what's protected in the rest of the country. They are trying to criminalize speech in relation to gender identity, which is wholly subjective. There's no law which protects gender identity up until now.
Yes. Okay. So protecting gender identity, so what does that mean in practice? Are we allowed to, for example, use the biblical approaches? Are we allowed to gender people according to their biological sex, or does it have to necessarily be? Are you saying it's coercing us to use trans pronouns?
So I think that Roger's just got lost there. I think, but I think that what it's saying is that actually you should refer to people by their chosen gender, whether that's their biological gender or not. And if you don't, that could be hate speech. And the problem as well is that hate is subjective here. It's totally subjectively defined. So it doesn't matter whether you intend to show hate. You might intend to show love. You might intend to be speaking the truth in love in this, but that doesn't matter. The person on the other side can say, I believe this is hateful, and according to law, therefore it is. It's like perception is reality, and truth is what you make it to be. So it's kind of crazy the way these things are. And yeah, whilst there is some protection for someone's religion and someone's sexual orientation, there is no protection for criticizing someone's gender. And so basically this effectively forces you to talk to somebody about their using their chosen pronouns and chosen gender identity. I think maybe Roger's back in now, but Roger, do you think this could be a crime then, referring to somebody by the wrong gender? How do you view that?
Yeah, first of all, apologizing for slippery fingers. I accidentally pressed the exit button. So, yes, I mean that's a problem generally with poorly worded legislation. That's first of all, hate is subjective, and when you have a law that presumes guilt above innocence, that there's a rebuttable presumption of guilt based on the subjective feelings of the so-called victim, no matter how sensitive that victim is. And the courts have noted that when it comes to these issues of personal identity, people are sensitive, obviously, because any comment you make, they will take as a slight as to who they are. So if I, as a Christian, don't want to be compelled to use certain pronouns, and someone takes that as hateful, they can certainly make a complaint to the police, and that could be subject to prosecution. So this is very dangerous, for a lot of reasons, because reasonable minds can certainly differ on gender identity. Reasonable minds can come to the conclusion that we are to identify as our biological sex, or that from a faith perspective, it's in fact sinful to disavow our biological sex. And so when you start making this subject a criminal sanction, it becomes very, very dubious and a big, big threat to religious liberty.
Yeah. So I know a criticism that one may have, and people who are listening in, please do put your comments and your questions in. But I guess a criticism that many would have of Christians is, does it harm our witness? Like, should we just be using gender identity pronouns and be caring about how others feel about our words and our speech? We don't want to offend. Should that be the standard for our language?
Well, I think that we should obey our consciences all the time, and that requires us to speak the truth all the time. And who someone is in terms of their gender is an aspect of truth about who that person is. And therefore, I would choose to obey my conscience and to follow God's view of that person, rather than necessarily what their own self-conception may be about gender or about something else necessarily.
Yes.
So it's a bit like, are you helping someone with anorexia by saying, oh yes, I agree, you are overweight, you're eating too much? No, you're not. So you want to speak the truth to that person. And here's someone who may have a gender identity issue and say, I want to be a boy, and when really I'm a girl. It's not helping them actually to say, oh yes, you can change to a boy, because actually you can't. And you can't change every single cell in your body. And the genetics is absolutely shot through every single cell of your body around this. And so I think we need to have people who are committed to truth, who are prepared to speak the truth, no matter what the price paid, no matter what the issue is. I was just thinking of Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. One of them is tell the truth, isn't it? And, I read that chapter and I was personally convicted about how committed I am to speaking the truth. And there's Jordan Peterson, not even a Christian, who's challenging me. We need to speak the truth every time. Speak the truth. And I think that's really our bottom line on this. Speak the truth about it. And the difficulty here is that this bill can criminalize speaking the truth, right?
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
Can. And so, please do respond to the consultation. Our example response is up online. David McCareth, I've just seen, has joined us on YouTube, and David McCareth is a doctor, right? And he said, you know, if someone comes in who's a 6-foot bearded chap who says, please call me madam, what will you do? And he said, well, I'll speak the truth. So I'll say, you know, hello, you know, and refer to him as he, because that's who he is. And the biology makes a difference in the medicine as well, right? So, you know, and he's had that commitment to truth, and he's paid a price for it. And, you know, and that's how Christians should be. And we should be prepared to pay a price for speaking the truth, because the truth will set people free.
Yes, absolutely. Frederick Revel has an interesting...
Can I just, just throw in there. Typically, I'm not theological on these issues, but I was thinking of my devotions this morning. I've been reading John. And John was, of course, an apostle, you know, the most beloved apostle, according to Scripture. And his account of Jesus could sometimes be very confrontational, and he could offend. And so this idea that we need polite Christianity, I think, isn't scriptural. You just need to read John to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Frederick Revel just asked an important question. Is it a poorly constructed law, or law purposely well made to control those who disagree? Because this isn't the first time Scotland have been trying to do things, controlling the things people say and controlling the way people think. So I don't know if Roger or Tim, one of you, Roger, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I think that there's certainly some intentionality here. There is this perception, they have not backed it up with one single iota of evidence that there is a need for this law, that there's somehow rampant racism or homophobia in Scotland. It's just something that they are, you know, when you want to interfere with a fundamental freedom like freedom of expression, the law requires you to do so in a very strict manner, and only in a manner that's necessary in a democratic society. That's what the case law says. They haven't made the case for that. And, you know, I think they are trying to compel speech. Otherwise, if this was well-intentioned, I don't think they would have gone to the lengths they have with gender identity and with one other element. A sheriff or a justice of the peace who has reasonable grounds to believe that an offense under the act is being committed on a premises allows the police to search a premises for materials. That material could be a chick publication or a tract that some might find offensive. So these are very significant police powers. So I don't think this is accidental. I think this is much more than just poor drafting.
Yeah. And the other point about this is that there are other aspects of this, aren't there? Like even just possession of material in your house, even possession of material in your house, you know, which you may have distributed or you may distribute, that's regarded as hateful, perceived to be hateful, you know, can criminalize you, can't it, Roger? That's extraordinary, right? Just possessing material could criminalize you. You possess something that says maybe that gender can't be changed or sex can't be changed or something. You could be criminalized for that. It's extraordinary. And then the search warrant.
It's more than gender. We see this with all our street preacher cases, that even though there's exemptions in the Public Order Act in England for preaching on sexual orientation, you know, our street preachers are still getting arrested because the police don't know the difference between the exception and incitement, and they're gonna bow to political correctness and arrest too often. Even though we have an acquittal rate of 100% on these cases, there is a big problem. Too many street preachers being arrested.
So why do you think there's that discontinuity then between what the police are doing and maybe what the actual law says? Do you think they're sort of on a kind of the PC brigade type issue? Like, why do you think there's that that discrepancy?
Poorly drafted legislation, because on the one hand, they're looking at incitement and they're doing so from a subjective standpoint. So even though there's this exemption that says, okay, you can preach on issues of sexual morality, you can preach on differing religious doctrines, when you have a bystander suggesting that hateful comments are being made, and quite often when someone in the audience is upset, they'll fabricate words that weren't actually spoken by the speaker, and the speaker will get arrested. And so it's just that these laws promote an overly sensitive society. And unfortunately, the byproduct of that is too much self-censorship, because anyone who then wants to go and evangelize or speak on these issues is going to think twice, because they don't want to get arrested.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Ama Garci on Facebook's asking, well, any practical advice? What can we be doing? Obviously, there's the government consultation that we should be responding to really let our voice be known. We underestimate the power our voice has in responding to these. Any other practical advice we can give to Christians regarding this?
Don't self-censor.
Yeah, no, I think that responding to consultations like this is, make use of our opportunity in democratic society to do that. Let's make our voice heard, and let's be committed to speak the truth, no matter what the cost, but speaking the truth and be committed to the truth. We're people of truth and we believe the truth, and so on. Truth is so important. And let's tell people as well, tell people about it, warn people, share it on social media, tell your friends, and make people aware of it. There have been a number of other organizations as well, including secular organizations, that are concerned about these laws. And so, let's build up a groundswell opinion against it that will cause the government in Scotland to decide to change their mind about this.
Yeah. Great. And interestingly, Mark Yarhouse makes the really interesting observation that regarding gender pronouns, there's a kind of subtly narcissistic thing undergirding this, because you don't use pronouns when talking to someone. When I'm talking to you, I don't say he, his. I use the name. And so it's actually regarding talking about someone else that you use pronouns. And so there's something quite narcissistic about it in a way, why there's this big emphasis on pronouns. It's about how we talk about people. Great. So we'll just round up on that. So moving on, as some of you have been aware, we've been heavily involved regarding abortion recently, particularly the DIY abortions. We had a judicial review last week. And Tim, I didn't know if you wanted to update us on any of the updates regarding abortion in the nation, because there's been some things in the media recently.
Sure. So there was a shocking story that came out over the weekend about how a woman had applied for one of these home abortions and had then killed her baby that was actually 28 weeks old. And the police are investigating this, but the point is that currently in law, in general, you can't have an abortion beyond 24 weeks. And according to these home abortions, the regulation state shouldn't be beyond 10 weeks. And here this lady had obtained these tablets via a telephone conversation. So there's no check on what the gestational limit is. The woman will say, oh, I think I last had my period on this date, or whatever it is. And that's the only assessment made. And what our legal case exposed was that the government had been advised that the only reason for a clinical visit was to ingest the tablets. That was the only reason for it. And clearly that's false. There are a number of tests taking place at the clinical visit, and one of them is an ultrasound test that determines formally what the gestational age is, whether you can have the tablet. And there are other blood tests and blood pressure tests and all of that kind of thing going on as well. And so sort of the inevitable has happened, very sadly. Somebody has phoned up and deliberately misled the doctors about the gestational age and then taken these tablets in order to kill her baby at 28 weeks. And the reporting says this is not the only instance of abuse of these regulations. And of course, how can you police it? There's no way of formally checking the gestational age of the baby in taking these tablets. And there are other cases where the tablets haven't worked and people are very upset, and there's been a huge amount of pain and distress and all of that in taking them and so on. All of which points to that the government shouldn't have liberalized the abortion regulations in this way, because it's dangerous and it doesn't protect the women themselves from being coerced into taking the abortions, and or the system itself from being abused by people who mislead the system about the gestational age of their baby concerned. And but we're really pleased because a number of you have written to your MP about this, and a number of MPs and members of the House of Lords have pressured the government about this, asked questions about it. You'll see some of that in our weekly news when it comes out later on today. And so I think the government is feeling the pressure about this, and we really want the government to reverse this decision. More clinics are back open now. I think a majority of abortion clinics are back open now in any case, and therefore they should immediately reverse this decision and say that a clinical visit is required
yes,
before
absolutely.
taking these pellets.
I think it's important to remember that this was a change a change that happened that was tried to be snuck under the rug. And the thing is it could have very easily. The importance of the judicial review has been getting this onto the media and the public's radar. I think many people just wouldn't have known that it was a problem and would have thought, okay, it makes sense to allow women to take abortion pills at home. But in fact, the outcome of it, I think it's quite prophetic seeing this outcome. There's the 28-week abortion that's happened. I think there's been 8 abortions between 10 weeks and 24 weeks that were there. A woman in the Mail was saying that she didn't get pregnant and because of it, and that she's had an awful experience. All these stories are beginning to come out because of it. Roger, I didn't know if you want to say where we're at now. I think we're looking to appeal the judicial review. How are we going to be taking that forward?
Yes, we have filed the appeal for the judicial review, and in the meantime, the whole premise of why they enacted this regulation is now moot because the vast majority of clinics are open again. So the fact that this regulation is still in place, almost proves the dishonesty that BPAS and the abortion industry has had throughout this entire process. You reference the fact that there's 7 or 8 investigations going on about misuse of the pill. I think BPAS has said that they themselves would investigate. And I think that in itself is a joke because their history of dishonesty, they're not going to go out and try to get a criminal sanction against a woman who's got an abortion. They're not going to want to make themselves look bad. So I think the provider who is behind the regulation self-investigating is a silly concept. So we're certainly moving forward with the appeal. And I think we have much stronger grounds now, given that the regulation, as we suggested it would, has superseded the time that it was supposed to with the opening of all these clinics.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is interesting you mentioned there about BPAS there. One of the things that really came up in the court documents last week, really, wasn't it? The way that the influence that the abortion lobbyists have and the abortion campaigners have with the government, the way that Anne Furedi has direct access to senior people in the government and able to influence in that way, clearly shows why it's important that we have Christians going into government who are able to speak in these issues, and why it's important that we as Christians are able to speak into this, because this is something the abortion campaigners have always wanted. They're kind of using the coronavirus as an excuse to bring this forward. And interestingly, it's interesting the way that this guidance has come in to last for 2 years. And as you're saying, abortion clinics are already open. Most of them are open. And yet they're wanting to do this for 2 years, which is, it shows what they're trying to do, because I think when the lockdown ends, they're going to want to keep these guidance in place. They're going to want to keep these procedures in place because they want to make it as easy as possible, which is evil in itself. And Manuel has made a good point there about people getting the pills and then delaying taking them for many weeks later. There's no way to really effectively police this. Sadly, and many people are going to be hurt. Many people are going to be victims because of this. Absolutely. I gather Fiona Bruce has been put forward a bill regarding abortion as well. Tim, do you want to just share a little bit about what she's been trying to do?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's actually a cross-party group of MPs. Actually, Fiona Bruce is one of the leading parties in it, and it is a new abortion bill, and it covers cleft lip, cleft palate, and club foot. And as it stands today in law, you can have an abortion right up to birth for a disability or a condition like that for the baby. And even though something like cleft lip or cleft palate or club foot can be easily correctable with surgery, and very often have been easily correctable with surgery, people are allowed to, and do sometimes, abort their babies just because they've got these minor issues. So she's bringing a bill, or a group of MPs are bringing a bill to Parliament, which seeks to make clear that the limit for aborting people with these conditions should be the same as it is for general abortion, which is 24 weeks. That seems like very, very clear, very defensible. an obvious thing. Of course, actually, Fiona Brewster's got a great backstory here in that her son was born with club foot, and her son then had surgery and had physiotherapy for about a year, and now you wouldn't know it and you wouldn't tell, and it hasn't hindered his life in any way. There are other extraordinary stories like Steven Gerrard, the Liverpool football player, England captain football player. I mean, he had club foot when he was born. I mean, if that doesn't show that this is not in any way something that disables what you can do, and a top footballer in the whole country, actually born with club foot, then had it sorted. Why are people being killed for those conditions? They shouldn't be. And this bill is seeking to make that clear. And I wish it every success. It's a great initiative, and it highlights the disparity of the law in this whole area.
Absolutely, but it just shows the inconsistency, I think, in the pro-abortion worldview, because the thing is, they'll say the unborn child is a clump of cells, and so they have no real grounds in their worldview to oppose cleft palate abortions, or even things like gender-selective abortions, because they're all just clumps of cells. I think this really highlights the evil that it heads towards regarding that.
Yeah.
E.K. Anderson makes an interesting comment, a question on abortion. Do we focus more on after the fact? I mean, if people did not commit fornication, there would be fewer abortions. Should we focus on those things that lead to unplanned pregnancies? What do you think, Roger?
I do. I just briefly to address your other point about the clump of cells. Aren't we all just clumps of cells? I mean, still,
Oh, yes.
That hasn't changed. We're bigger clumps of cells, but we're still clumps of cells. So,
yes.
No, I agree with Ike wholeheartedly. If we look at the nation, and not just the UK, but let's focus on the UK here. Over the last 60 years, the divorce rate, I think, has gone up 500%. The number of children being born outside of wedlock has gone up astronomically. We're not family-centered anymore. Marriage is now about this romantic concept of love instead of rearing children. And so we've got this disposable culture, a hookup culture, and that leads to this idea that abortion is okay because we have unlimited freedom without any responsibility. That's kind of the mantra of this generation. And I think we need to get back to a position of social responsibility. And we find that in the teaching of the gospel. We find that in church doctrine about things like sexual morality, about the importance of marriage. All of these things are connected.
And I think that abortion actually sort of promotes the idea that sexual immorality has no consequences, fuels the idea that sexual expression has no consequences, as if that's true. And of course, it isn't true, because having a baby and then killing it is a massive consequence, and people live with that guilt and the shame of that for many years afterwards. And the porn industry also, as we talked about last week, benefits and wants to promote this and that kind of thing. So there's a comment.
Yes.
There's a comment from a lady here saying she had two cleft palate babies. Thank you for sharing that on Facebook. That's great. Maybe you'd like to write to your MP and explain that, because it's a powerful story to show people about that. And another one from Francis Sutherland on Facebook. No one shows a film clip of what abortion looks like. As a student nurse, I unfortunately saw this in theatre. It's horrific to witness, brutal, and very distressing. So this is the reality, and this is the reality that people need to see and realize about what abortion is like.
But that's why our case with CBR UK was so important, because it's about taking the reality of abortion to the streets. CBR UK are a group, an educational group, educating the public about the reality of what abortion is and what abortion does. And they were in Walthamstow, showing the constituents of Walthamstow what their MP, Stella Creasy, was trying to do. Stella Creasy was the one who put forward the amendment which forced abortion on Northern Ireland. And they were saying, this is what your MP supports. And the local council banned them from that, giving them a community protection notice, wasn't it, Roger?
Yes, that's correct. And, the idea that this is kind of too hot to handle, it's too inflammatory to show, I think is a non-starter, given the things we already show in the public arena. all sorts of sexuality on billboards. You look at any cigarette packaging, there's horrendous photos on that. Across the news a few years ago, I remember they were showing the Abu Ghraib prison tortures. All of this is because these issues are of extreme public importance, and images speak louder than words. And if we want to change the public consciousness on abortion, people need to know what is actually happening and how gruesome it really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And there have been a few comments there about helping people. Hannah Ajipong was saying about support being needed, and there are helplines out there for those who find themselves in a crisis pregnancy situation, pregnancy crisis helpline. Our friends at Centre for Bioethical Reform, CBR, have just launched a new initiative looking to set up crisis pregnancy centres called Hope Pregnancy Centres. So absolutely, it's the both and regarding the helping those who are in these situations, but the call to justice, that the unborn child is acknowledged as made in the image of God with inherent value and inherent dignity. So absolutely, we need to be continuing to contend on these issues. Tim and Roger, what are the things that maybe some Christians can be doing on this issue now? How can we be speaking about abortion?
Yeah, well, we've been encouraging our supporters to write to their MPs about this the DIY abortions at home, the regulation that was changed for the coronavirus thing that still stands today, even though we're aware of these abuses of it, a 28-week baby and so on. Do write to your MP, make them aware, say this legislation should not be allowed. Now that clinics are back open, it should be reversed immediately, and women should be protected by having a proper consultation, have a proper appointment, be able to talk it through privately so that they're not being coerced, and having the gestational limit properly checked as well. So do write to your MPs about that. Really keen to get the pressure onto government about this, and we'll wait and see how our appeal in court goes as well. But if obviously the decision's reversed before then, we may, that will become moot. But I'm really keen to keep the pressure up on the government on this at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Roger, was there anything you wanted to add?
Just talking a little bit about Christian Hacking, who's a member of CBR. He's kind of become the poster spokesman for the abortion protest movement because of his arrest a few months back for publicly praying in front of a clinic. And there's mixed public opinion on that. There's a segment of the population who thinks that guys like Christian are they're fundamentalists or crazy. But if you think about it, if you think what is actually happening in those clinics, and the poster campaign is part of that, but if we really look at that reality, then I think those who aren't outside of the clinic might be much more crazy for allowing this to happen in a civilized society.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's an issue we as Christians in the church need to be speaking into, prophetic, engaging on, and speaking hope to, calling out injustice, but preaching the cross, that people can be forgiven from this, that Christ died even for the sin of abortion, as he died for all of our sins as well. So just moving on to a final thing that happened this week. Steve Chalk, who some of you may know, a minister at a church in Waterloo, he tweeted, "The rainbow stands for all time as a God-given symbol of inclusion and hope. It offers constant challenge and inspiration, especially as we think of those who have previously been undervalued or have suffered the cold hand of exclusion and a lack of hope. Hashtag NHS, hashtag LGBT, hashtag BAME." Well, his support for the LGBT issue and agenda isn't new. He came out as pro-gay marriage back in around 2012, 2013. But it has been interesting seeing him and seeing this throughout the country, the rainbow flag being co-opted to promote the LGBT agenda. And now it's being used for the NHS. And it's interesting, he uses that phrase, inclusion and hope. Well, if we look at Genesis 9 and read about what the rainbow is really about, it's about God's covenant with Noah, his promise never to flood the earth again. And obviously that's in the context of God having flooded the earth because of the evil and wickedness and depravity and the abominable practices of the world at that time. And so to now use the rainbow to say we're going to use it to celebrate desires, practices that are not of God, that are not biblical, that are contra-biblical, and that's being pushed into the church through the false teachers, is outrageous. It's outrageous, and we as Christians need to speak about what the true message of the rainbow is. And in a sense, the rainbow is inclusive. This covenant was made to all people, but the thing is the gospel is inclusive and exclusive at the same time. Anyone can come to the cross. Anyone can receive forgiveness. Anyone can repent and know and be adopted and cry out, Abba, Father. But the point is that requires receiving it by faith and repentance, turning away from our sin, putting on the new self, and coming into union with Jesus Christ. And that's what the rainbow is about. That's what the gospel is about. The gospel is not about condoning sin and celebrating sin. It's about celebrating the love, mercy, grace of God, who was glorified on the cross by taking the penalty for our sin because of his love for us. Tim and Roger, I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a sort of extraordinary, really, that Steve Chalke would say a symbol for all time of inclusion, and actually, this symbol has been adopted fairly recently by LGBT activists as a symbol of how they view it, their kind of inclusion, and then for him to say for all time, it's been a symbol of, the implied thing here is sexual inclusion, right? The inclusion of people with sexual immorality into our society, as if nothing was wrong with that. And obviously I want to treat people equally and treat people with respect under the law, but they're looking for rather more than that, as we've just discussed with the hate crime type of legislation under Scotland and so on. So for him to say for all time this has been a symbol of effectively sexual immorality, that's the implied thing here, is extraordinary, and it is so wrong and so false and such an obvious distortion of what the Bible says. And it appears like he is, why is he putting this tweet out? Because there has been a fuss about the rainbow symbol. The LGBT people are upset. I wrote an article about it. They're upset that the rainbow has, in their view, been hijacked by the NHS, and they're wondering if they're going to get it back. And they've sort of pointed out that rainbow flags, exactly the same as the LGBT flag, have been sold on eBay as NHS flags. And they're kind of obsessed about this. Hang on, this is meant to be our flag, and it's kind of a bit amusing in a funny sort of way. But Steve Chalke seems to be siding with them, saying, no, this flag ought to be reserved for LGBT activism and not be used for a symbol of hope and reclamation and God's promise not to punish the whole world in the same way as he did back then. And that's the kind of way it's being adopted by the NHS. It's not quite the same, but still that's more closer to the biblical understanding of the rainbow. And for Steve Chalke to sort of object to that is extraordinary and so shockingly against the Bible. It's just kind of astonishing, really. Yeah,
no, absolutely. Roger, I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to add.
Well, just that, I've never liked it when activists or campaigners mix the sacred and the profane. And the fact that the rainbow was hijacked in the first place by the LGBT lobby, I think that was intentional and unnecessary. And, for them now to be complaining that it's being used for other purposes is disingenuous. And, I think... how many times have we seen in culture the cross being usurped for ill purposes? So this isn't something novel, that cultural symbols being usurped for other reasons.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You make a good point there, actually. But it's important that we speak about these things. I know Pete Hodge saying there, why is Chalke even given a platform? But the thing is, he had a platform. He's had a platform for many years, and sadly seems to have lost his way a bit, to put it lightly. So it's important that we speak out against the messages from those who have influence when they're misleading people and leading people to destruction. But yeah, as you said, if anything, the rainbow is a symbol that reminds us of God's punishment then of the destruction of wickedness. Although we thank the Lord that he has promised not to do that again, even though we often look at society and think, gosh, don't we deserve it? Well, thank everybody for joining. Just some notices before we round up. this coming Monday, Christian Concern policy researcher Karis Mosley will be doing our next Gospel Issues Facing Christians Today seminar on how the history of transgender activism in the UK. So how did we get to where we are today? So that really ties in with some of the things coming in regarding the hate speech laws in Scotland. So I really recommend you tune in for that. The link is going to be there in the comments. So that's this coming Monday at 8 p.m. and she'll be joined by Christian Legal Centre clients Nigel and Sally Rowe. Some of you who maybe follow us will know Nigel and Sally Rowe. They were the parents who were concerned about the trans agenda being pushed in their Church of England school when a 6-year-old was coming into school as the opposite gender, and the school and parents and children were all being encouraged to embrace that. So they will be joining that for the interview after that. So Karis Mosley, the history of trans activism, this Monday, 8 p.m. Our following Gospel Issues seminar will be on Monday, the 15th of June, with Wilberforce Academy Director and Head of Public Theology, Reverend Dr. Joe Boot. He will be leading us in the question of what is gospel culture, and taking us through a biblical understanding of the kingdom of God and how it relates to the mandate we have as Christians today. So what does it truly mean to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven? So do make sure you make a note of that. That's 8 p.m. on Monday, the 15th of June. I recommend if you go onto our YouTube channel, Christian Concern, you can subscribe and you'll receive notifications, and you can ask to set a reminder for when these events come up. So do make sure you do that. We're often putting lots of things out on Facebook and Twitter and through our emails. So do make sure that you sign up to receive those if you aren't doing so already. If you want to receive our weekly email, which details all the information going on in the nation, we've only been able to cover a few, go to christianconcern.com/hello. And do make sure you keep telling people about the work that we're doing. Often many do not know the issues facing Christians today. And of course, keep writing to your MP about issues such as the abortion, respond to the government consultation on hate speech, do continue to be engaged and continue to be praying for God's kingdom to come in this land and for his name to rule and his lordship to be acknowledged. And we pray. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Tim and Roger. It's been great to have you.
Thank you, Ben. Great.
Great to chat about these issues.
Thanks. Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.